Well, as we go deeper into the world of digital currency, it's becoming more important to make sure that there is a secure connection to the traditional financial system. A new stablecoin toolkit has been developed at the Wharton School as a way to potentially bridge the gap between the two worlds. Pleasure to be joined by Kevin Werbach, who is a professor of legal studies and business ethics here at the Wharton School. Kevin, great to have you with us again. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dan.
We have talked so much about this area over the years. I mean, the stable coin, it's not a new concept, but it becomes more important to bring forth a toolkit like this now because why?
Stablecoins have been around for roughly 10 years. A stablecoin is basically a digital asset. So it's a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ether, but it's designed to remain stable, to typically keep at the value of the US dollar. And stablecoins have been used primarily in the digital asset world as a form of liquidity on exchanges, but they've been kind of in a regulatory gray area. And what's happened in recent years is there's been a lot of activity around stablecoins. There's been interest in stablecoins for other uses like payments. And regulators are now starting to create regimes to deal with stablecoins. There was one adopted in the European Union, and just last year, the US passed something called the Genius Act, which created a legal framework for stablecoins.
And so the importance of this toolkit is to help provide a better understanding of kind of the stablecoin landscape at the moment.
Stablecoins are bigger than most people realize. There's several $100 billion of value in assets. But if you look at the transaction volume of stablecoins, Visa has found that the transaction volume of stablecoins last year was $35 trillion, which is double what Visa's traditional payment volume is. Now, that's a little bit overstated. A lot of that actually turns out to be high frequency trading and spoofing and so forth. But the adjusted number they come up with is still $7 trillion. Again, most of that is used in digital asset trading, but it's quite significant. 80% of all digital asset trades use stablecoins for at least one leg. And a survey last year by Fireblocks, a digital asset custody company, found that 90% of financial services firms, and this includes traditional firms and fintechs as well, were looking at using stablecoins or already were doing so. So it's a significant phenomenon, but it's a deeply misunderstood phenomenon, which is why we put this toolkit together.
Okay, and so one of the sections of the toolkit is defining and categorizing the
Mhm.
different types of stablecoin.
It turns out that when you ask the question, what is a stablecoin? It's a much harder question than people realize. The specific laws, like the Genius Act, have a definition of what they call a payment stablecoin. But then you look at all the stablecoins that are actually out there in the market today, many of them don't conform to that definition.
Right.
And there are all kinds of other things like central bank digital currencies, tokenized deposits, tokenized money market funds that are similar to stablecoins. And so what we do in this is really, I think, the first academically rooted document that says systematically what is a stablecoin. We come up with a definition, precise definition about what is a stablecoin, and then we talk about how stablecoins are different from other forms of money, how they're used, how they're made stable, and so forth.
Right, and so you laid out a variety of uses for stablecoins, but from where we are now, how much farther do these uses go potentially?
Potentially very far. We are trying to, in this report, put out a balanced perspective. This report involved an expert group of industry participants, academic participants, legal experts, and others from around the world with different views. And there definitely are people who are convinced stablecoins are going to be massive. There are various reports talking about the value going from roughly 250 billion to 2 or $5 trillion in a few years. We're not taking a position on that. We're trying to map out what the use cases look like and help policymakers as well as industry participants understand what to do. So clearly, the biggest use of stablecoins today is in digital asset trading,
Yeah.
but there is interesting take up of uses in payments, especially in developing countries, places with high inflation. But a lot of interesting experiments and activity going on in places like the US with major financial services firms, because there's tremendous efficiency, especially for any kind of cross border transaction, in using a stable coin as opposed to the traditional payment system. And then the other potential uses are tremendous as well, but they haven't really taken off yet.
But do they go to the point of this kind of moving towards kind of a commonality use of us using traditional currency at some point.
The point that we make in the paper is that stable coins are potentially the bridge between the digital asset world and the traditional financial system. The traditional financial system has all kinds of limitations. It's massive, but especially when you talk about payments, which is this plumbing that most people don't see, it's trillions and trillions of dollars going back and
Right.
forth around the world, but it's incredibly inefficient. There's all kinds of limitations and silos and inefficiencies and gatekeepers and so forth, and in order to overcome that, you need a common global, secure, decentralized platform. That's what blockchain is. And
Yeah.
so there is this potential to bring these worlds together in a very powerful way.
So you talk about the global component of this. How much of a global framework is already there in the use of stablecoin, and what needs to potentially develop even farther as we move, further down the line?
Mm. There are a whole set of regulatory issues. Law is national, even though money is global and blockchains are global. And so different countries come up with legal regimes. As I said, the European Union has one, although theirs is not very widely adopted for various reasons. The US now has one. Hong Kong has one. Singapore has one. Many countries are looking at creating legal regimes, and there's some commonality between them, but they're not all going to be the same. And that's okay. Every
Okay.
country doesn't have to be the same. It isn't right now for traditional finance. But there's also a huge amount of activity in stablecoins that's still in this regulatory gray area. Uses that are not mapped into these existing regimes, but they're being very widely adopted. Ultimately, there needs to be an environment where there's clear regulation because
Right.
it's essential to have things like anti money laundering and countering terrorist financing checks, to have certainty for global transactions, to have mechanisms for oversight while still allowing for fluidity of currency flows and innovation. So that doesn't mean every country has the same regime, but there needs to be a lot of coordination. It's starting to
Yeah.
happen, but it's still very early.
Right. So that at least everybody is reasonably on the same page in terms of how this process is going to work and develop as we move forward.
That's a big goal of this toolkit, to try to give everyone a common language and a common understanding of what the possibilities are and what the issues are, and then they can decide where they go from there.
So, what then do you hope this toolkit will bring to the table?
Well, it stimulates discussion. It gives everyone a solid understanding. The core insight that we started with is that we can't talk about stablecoins without having a solid understanding of what a stablecoin is.
Right.
And it's fine, again, for the US to say there's all kinds of stablecoins that we are not going to allow within the US financial system. But at least you can't ignore that those other stablecoins are out there and they may be legitimate in other countries, and maybe those need to be brought into the US regime because they actually are other appropriate mechanism. Those are the kinds of conversations that need to happen. And frankly, industry participants need to be aware of what the possibilities are. And not just be going on hype or not just be fixating on the way this market used to be historically. Those are the kinds of conversations. And since the toolkit came out, we've already received a number of inquiries from regulators and other organizations that are interested in starting conversations and potential collaborations with us.
Kevin, it sounds very exciting, and congratulations on the work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
You got it. Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics here at the Wharton School.